This day in New York changed my whole life. Even though I looked quite happy on the outside, to be honest, on the inside, I had a lot of turmoil. Because for the last 6 months, I traveled through the whole US and I enjoyed life to the fullest. But sadly, this time was now over and my old life was knocking at the door. Furthermore, I was around 15,000 Swiss francs in debt and I had no clue for what I should do next when I go back home. So my future wasn't looking promising at all. But anyway, after that boat trip, I remember that I grabbed an original New York hot dog and I strolled towards the Central Park. And totally at a loss, I sat down on a bench and I took a bite. And while I was chewing on that hot dog, I woke up from my daydream when ketchup ran down my chin and dropped onto my new white sneaker. Yeah, a bit frustrated, I've cleaned it and I gave myself a jolt. Come on, Jonathan, don't sit there like an old brat. Do something. So I picked my map and my diary and I started to write some notes about my final road trip all the way from Boston to New York, as I always did. And as I was writing down my notes, all of a sudden, a spark ignited. I had it. I realized that actually I needed a plan, just like the one I have in front of me. Something I can hold on to and which gives me a perspective. So I quickly finished my notes and I started to draw. And I discarded it, and I tried again, and I discarded it again. But after a few tries, I finally had it. A beautiful drawing of my personal journey, my 15 years plan. Yeah, it's a beauty, right? Yeah, but we better go along with this version here. So today, almost 15 years later, I have reached all of my goals and even more. And the big question I've asked myself is, how the heck was that possible? I mean, I was in my early 20s when I drew up this plan. So I reflected on my personal process, and actually a recurring pattern appeared. And this is what I would like to share with you today. My 3 A's, which helped me being successful on this plan. So on my journey the last couple of years, I defined countless different aims. And the aims were from small ones to big ones. And the aims I set myself, they weren't mostly special or extraordinary. I'm quite sure lots of you have the same ones. But I started to write them down and sometimes specify them. And that made the difference. The second pattern was to become aware of my behavior and especially my routines. I reflected on if they were helping me realize my goals or not. And if not, they were obviously bad ones. And third, if necessary, I got rid of them by making just minor adjustments in my routines and in my behaviors. And here as well, they weren't mostly special and they weren't mostly extraordinary, just some small adjustments. And I realized that consistency was way more important than intensity. And I also realized that I followed this cycle over and over again. And at the beginning, everything was quite tough and hard, but the longer I was on my journey, the easier it was to change things. So it was like to be on the children's carousel, you know, exhausting at the beginning to get moving, but easy once you have the momentum. And now, I would like to share with you some of my personal examples of the 3 A's in action. So back that day in the US, when I came back home from the US to Switzerland, I enrolled to study business engineering part-time. At the beginning, everything was quite easy and I was still in that USA chilled adventure mood, but I almost dropped out after the second semester due to my old behavior patterns, because I focused more on doing fun things and hanging out with my friends instead of studying. So old behavior, old results. So I stood with my back to the wall. I either had to change something or I would be kicked out from school, and unconsciously I applied the first time my 3 A's. So I remember that on a regular Sunday, I wrote down my overall aim: graduate university within the regular study time. So I posted it at the wall in my room, and it lasted there for the next 4 years. And then I became aware of some bad behaviors, and I had a lot of them. And one of them was, instead of learning like this, can't imagine, I did it like that. So it was pretty obvious that failing is quite probable. So I changed things, and instead of kicking off the weekend, for example, On Thursday, it was Thursday back then, I shifted it to Friday, which gave me a bit more time during the week to study. As I said, nothing special, nothing extraordinary, just some small adjustments. And it actually worked. Out of 30 part-time students, only 4 graduated within the regular study time. And I was one of them. So now, new behavior, new results. Another aim was to pursue my passion for travel, for which I needed money. And because I studied part-time, money was quite scarce. So again, I became aware of some bad routines, spending routines. And one of them was, for example, I'm quite sure all of you know how it is. You wake up in the morning, maybe a bit tired, maybe a bit lazy, and honestly, I was mostly a bit late. And then I rushed to work, and on my way to work, I grabbed a cup of coffee. And because there was no time for breakfast, I also couldn't resist to buy one of those delicious, freshly made sandwiches in the gallery. So that cost me around 10 francs a day and almost 2,000 francs a year. So again, I made some small adjustments. And in that case, I managed to get up just around 10 minutes earlier and eat a cheaper breakfast at home. And don't get me wrong here, it was quite tough to lower my standards, but it was definitely worth it. Because all the easy savings, they took me to these places and even further. Then, with the aim to make career, I decided to change my behavior as well in my profession. So instead of being minimalistic at work, I sometimes did the extra mile, or I got interested in other business topics, disciplines, or especially people. I've learned from them and I applied it. And my career went from being a mechanic to become a project manager, was promoted into a high potential program, then I got nominated for new innovation projects, and finally I was promoted for a management position. And as a highlight of my career, I was honored of giving the former US ambassador to Switzerland, Edward McMullen, a tour through our plant. So again, new behavior, new results. So far, it might sound that my previous years were like a romance. I'll promise you, they weren't at all. But believe me or not, my 3As also helped me in sometimes very difficult and emotional times. For example, my wife and I were going through recently. Our 3rd child was born with a physical birth defect, and an unforeseen intense therapy was necessary. Due to my further development in my career, my income slightly increased, and because of that, my wife and I decided that she will temporarily reduce her time at work to manage the everyday life of our children, including the therapy. And I took over as much of the other issues as possible. So once again, I had to change something, but that time I had huge existential fears. But my first aim was to find somewhere more time in my daily life. And therefore, I was looking for some unnecessary things I did. For example, one of them was, I all the time snoozed my alarm clock in the morning. Then I got up late in the morning, and then I stuck in traffic jam, and I lost hours in there. So I decided to change that. I didn't snooze anymore and get up earlier. So I saved all that time, and I was there for my family to support them. Shortly after, I also wanted to face my existential fears. But the problem was I was quite busy, and I almost didn't have time for anything. So again, I reflected on my behaviors, and one of them was, which I changed, instead of listen to radio during my commute, I started to listen to audiobooks, from financial audiobooks to blockchain audiobooks, over to audiobooks about successful people, and even psychology. And the topics drew me in so much that I also decided to adjust my pre-bedtime routine as well. So I decided to, instead of surfing through social media, started to read books about the previous mentioned topics. And it works again. My wife and I, at a certain point, decided to adjust, to go along with my knowledge, and we decided to make use of it. And after a while, we made some budgeting, and we handled some money issues. And as a final result, my wife and I were able to reach the last goal of, meanwhile, our 15 years plan. Our dream of our own home, which is currently under construction. So to make a cut here, I think you understand the principle which I want to tell you. These were just a few examples out of hundreds of different small adjustments I've made, and in detail, they all seem to be insignificant, but it was the sum which made the difference, and only over time, effects gets visible. So I've also learned to be patient. So what stands between us and achieving our dreams, or even our goals, has actually nothing to do with having some special skills or even talent. It has more to do how we approach our problems and make decisions to solve them. So therefore, I encourage you to start. Grab a piece of paper, write down your own goals, go your journey, make some small adjustments, step by step, hand by hand, and start to be an active participant instead of being a spectator of your life. Thank you.